So here's how do you choose a strategy for your organization. So two organizations with very similar visions and missions may choose different ways of achieving their goals. Often creating the strategies, organizations limit themselves to the simplest ideas. For example, withdrawing from programs which do not meet the needs of the beneficiaries. Very good organizations, even though being provided money, have actually declined the funding because it doesn't meet their overall mission and vision. And the reason for that is a whole idea that they don't want to just become sort of people for hire. They'll take any project that comes around. And in fact, most of those organizations continue to be extremely successful because they stick to their overall mission, vision, and long-term goal. The other one that is when you're developing a strategy is attempting not to copy the methods applied by other organizations, trying to remain unique. Here, for example, a lot of organizations, especially in the last 5 years, have popped up to react to the whole issue of misinformation and disinformation. So not organizations, unfortunately, are new, but many organizations also have to admit have been adopted or included these new projects because, again, it's quite donor-driven. Let's be honest, we work in a donor-driven society. And then one of the things that you try to do is you try to actually diversify your financing. So when you're developing your strategy, you don't want to become completely dependent on, for example, just one foundation. You have to make sure that your strategy includes at least other projects or other goals and objectives that allows you to diversify your donors. So some donor may, for example, just support education, while another donor may support, for example, advocacy aspect of it. And so when you're doing that, you have to be sort of, quite conscious of that. And the last is the sharing the burden of unattractive programs with other organizations. What that means is that as it really, it really means sometimes, unfortunately, you're working with other organizations and programs that unfortunately are not really sort of, very compelling, but it's needed in order to implement. It really is sort of this where you're coming together in order to address a certain kind of program that neither side really wants to, but unfortunately has to be implemented, but we'll skip that for now. So how do you choose a strategy? There are a great number of diversified strategies which may be applied depending on the situation and needs of the organization. And there's no right or wrong choice. The appropriate choice for one organization with its set of skills and aspirations may be entirely inappropriate for another working in the same field. Nevertheless, there are some common issues that organizations have to address deciding upon a strategic choice. So some of the choices that when you're dealing with strategy as an organization is that we want to help a lot or we want to help just a few. Are we trying to treat a symptom or we're actually involved in a cause? Are we providing services or are we a campaign for change? So here are 6 strategies for NGOs. Strategy of a niche. So let's say we're creating a new nonprofit or your current organization is looking to actually change its overall strategy. These are the 6 strategies that most organizations will fall into. So an organization is involved in such an activity that has not been undertaken by another organization. This is a niche. So you're finding out what's something that no one else is doing and you found that there's actually a need for it. It's demand driven. Sometimes such strategies result in establishing a new organization. However, it also may be chosen as a conscious decision during the planning process, meaning that even in your existing organization, during the planning process, you find out that actually your organization can meet a specific kind of niche that because of obviously, times have developed differently. Particularly, here's a good example, as I mentioned earlier, is the entire issue of misinformation, disinformation. You have a lot of existing organizations that have never worked in that field, have adopted those programs in order to fill this niche. Unfortunately, so many of them adopted, now it's become a common thing. Strategy of targeting. Another possibility is to direct the efforts to a specific client group. In this case, we do similar things as other organizations, but our services are provided to a group that is uniquely ours. Such strategies are fulfilled by, for example, associations of people suffering from rare diseases. This actually may apply quite much more to a lot of organizations at the moment, because you simply have access to certain groups that most organizations do not, especially, for example, organizations that may be out in the rural areas or because of language barriers. And quite often, and I think in the previous discussion we had, donors are really interested in actually trying to be much more inclusive and providing assistance to groups that that normally do not receive such benefits. The strategy of quality. We do the same as others, only better. This is not easy, particularly when the competition is strong. So the best way I can describe this to you is that, I always hear that everybody likes to play basketball, but unfortunately there's only one Michael Jordan. And here, in fact, you have a few organizations that actually act like Michael Jordans in the nonprofit sector, because one is they've actually become very good at the subject matter expert they're in, but they also have an incredible marketing, public relations campaign that's always reminding everyone that they are the only show in town. And this is really costly, and it's usually done really by organizations that have both, tremendous amount of funding, not only on the program side, but also on the PR side. And number 4, copying, the strategy of copying. Many organizations decide to take actions that are to cause a chain reaction of results. The effect of multiplication may be achieved by training trainers, teachers. So here what you're trying to do is saying, we're not going to target any particular group. What we're going to try to do is literally help other organizations copy our skill sets. Let them become sort of, your if you want to call your partners, or your franchises, if you want to call it. And this is a lot where you have a lot of organizations, and I think you're familiar with many of them, who just really all they do is a training of the trainers. And the idea is, again, and it's a niche for them, and and you have a number of them like partners. I think for training is one example of that. And the 5th one is the strategy of social change. There are also organizations which decide to influence society. Such organizations will conduct research and publish their results. They organize lobbying in order to change legal regulations, and finally work with other organizations and institutions, making coalitions in favor of proposed changes. And the last one is the strategy of profitable mission. The aim of the nonprofit organization is not to generate profit, which does not mean that it is being financial loss. They are organizations which do not based on sponsors, we're not based on something, but generate resources necessary for the activities themselves. If the mission of the organization is promoting culture, publishing good literature is a possible activity. This is, on the other hand, may bring revenues which will then be devoted to less profitable causes. This here, in my opinion, is really what most of the more effective nonprofits that I met when I was working in Central and Eastern Europe, and most of them were culturally driven. They survived by selling the journals, or they set up a cultural venue. They were there, in fact, and became self-sustainable because their revenue was not really completely dependent on donors, but also on the revenues they were able to raise through various activities, either through plays, selling of the journal. No one became extremely rich over it, but they did serve the purpose of their respective community.